So it's not exactly breaking news at this point, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and in particular the West's reaction to that invasion, has caused a commodity price hike all over the world. Now, this isn't the extent of the economic impact of this war, but it is probably the largest single factor, and as a result, it's been getting a load of attention from pretty much every single country out there. Oil prices have obviously spiked a major amount, about 50% from their averages of last year up to where they sit today, and the reason for this is pretty simple. Western countries don't want to be buying Russian oil, they don't want to be funding the Russian war machine, so they're making efforts to try and get their supplies from elsewhere. Now, in reality, oil is a very interconnected and global market. So just because the West, the US or Europe don't buy Russian oil, that doesn't mean that oil just fails to be sold. Right now, it's mostly being sold in excess quantities over to India and China, who are more than happy to be picking up barrels for $60 below market price. Natural gas is, of course, another very important commodity that is exported in droves from Russia. The vast majority of natural gas in Europe comes right from natural gas fields in Russia, and the West just doesn't want to be buying that gas too. On this front, though, I'm afraid the market is far less flexible. It's really difficult to transport natural gas around without pipelines. You have to liquefy it and keep it in pressurized containers, and that's a very expensive and time-consuming and difficult process to make. As a result, natural gas prices are far more regional. They are spiking in places like Europe to a much greater extent than in places like America, as you would expect. Now, other commodity prices have been impacted too: copper, nickel, and iron, everything under the sun really. But the one that's really been garnering a lot of attention recently, that suddenly caught the world by storm and that everyone is worried about, is wheat prices, which have absolutely soared. As you can see from this graph here, wheat prices are by and large up about 50% from where they were a year ago, and this is mostly again due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, the reason for this is pretty simple. Russia and Ukraine create and export a huge amount of wheat, about 30% of the world's production. In Ukraine, that supply is being limited for a number of different reasons. Firstly, farms in Ukraine are obviously disrupted. There's a literal war going on. Some fields have been destroyed, some are caught in no man's land, some have been captured by Russians and then captured by Ukrainians, and people, farmers in particular, are just in no position to harvest their crops. There are also less farmers than usual. Military conscription is in full force in Ukraine. There are about 1 million servicemen in Ukraine's armed forces right now to defend against this Russian invasion, and many of them will have been those people who would normally be farmers. Then we have the fact that infrastructure has been targeted. Railways and stations and major points for loading wheat onto ships has been disrupted in Odessa and other cities as well. In Russia, it's sort of the other situation. Russian fields and farmers are having no trouble at all, and logistics is still running for the most part. But where Russia is having a bit of trouble is with finding buyers, as usually Russia would be trying to sell their wheat to European neighbors. It's an easier market to get, and it's a very valuable one too. But overnight, Europe and the rest of the West has really just decided against buying commodities from Russia when possible, and this is one of those points where it is possible for them to mostly cut out Russian wheat supply. So that's what they're doing. This does though mean that there is a shortage of food, a shortage of wheat, and it's most pronounced in North Africa at the moment. It does seem like we may be on the brink of famine over there, so there is a major humanitarian crisis booming. Now, one of the largest problems with what is happening is that usually wheat would be exported via sea, via the Black Sea. It would be loaded up onto ports, put into container ships, and then shipped off around the world. But of course, there's a war down there. The Russian cruiser Moskva was sunk in the Black Sea. It's not a safe place for trade container ships to be right now, and so there is no trade happening there. It does though appear that actually there is a solution at play, or at least Russia and Turkey are trying to broker one. They are negotiating with each other to try and create a supposed sea lane, a safe area for export, so that passage can continue, so that trade can continue in the area. The idea here is that Ukraine and Russia, and then a third supposed neutral country, Turkey, would work together to clear mines from the area to ensure that that area, that sea passage, remains free of military activity, and that those trade ships that pass through would be protected from all sides and not targeted by any side either. The problem is, though, this is a very hot topic, as you might expect from what is literally a war zone. It, of course, needs agreement from all sides, and that isn't really happening right now because Ukraine isn't even being consulted during this negotiation process. Ukraine are obviously also worried about what might happen if this process goes ahead. Let's not forget that Russia is not exactly a good faith actor on the international stage. They told the entire world with a straight face for months on end that nothing was planned in Ukraine, that there was no invasion, that they didn't want war, and then overnight they switched on a dime. They invaded a sovereign country and they started a war that has so far killed thousands and thousands of innocent people. Ukraine is specifically worried that if an area of the sea were to be demined by Turkish ships, Russia would capitalize on that opportunity and they would try and launch naval attacks, maybe even naval invasions of Ukraine using that newly demined area. They're also not entirely convinced that Russia would allow ships to pass through freely and unabided anyway. And why would they be? Russia is the one who is creating this wheat crisis in the first place by starting this war, which of course they never had to do. The big problem here is that Russia is pretending to be a proponent of solving this wheat crisis when Russia is the reason it's here in the first place. As I said, that country is not a good faith actor. They are practically weaponizing food supplies to blackmail the world, as seen in the CNBC article. Now, all this is to say that if this deal does come to fruition, it isn't necessarily a good thing. It doesn't even mean that the wheat supply crisis would be solved. And also, the deal hasn't even been agreed yet between Russia and Turkey. Negotiations stopped a couple of days ago due to a deadlock. And so we shouldn't necessarily be getting our hopes up now that wheat prices are going to be falling. Maybe they will in the future, but as of right now, things are really a bit unclear. The reality is here that if Russia wanted low wheat and low commodity prices, they could have just not invaded Ukraine in the first place, or they could end their invasion now, or they could just allow container ships to travel through the Black Sea and not shoot them as they go. That's always been an option as well. Russia wants high commodity prices because they are net exporters of commodities by and large, and so high prices means more money for them, more revenue for the Russian government, and more funding for the Russian military. It's also worth thinking about Turkey's position as well. They are a NATO member, although they've been at odds with a lot of other NATO members recently, and it shouldn't really be controversial to say that they're a little bit unpopular on that bloc right now. They have made certain efforts to actually work with Russia even after this invasion, even after the rest of NATO has taken a stand against Russia, but they've also been selling arms, notably the TB2 Bayraktar drones, to Ukraine as well, so they've clearly been playing both sides. Now, another new development that really does make the likelihood of this deal coming through and wheat prices lowering once more make it seem a little bit less likely is that it turns out Russia is being accused of stealing wheat from Ukraine and selling it abroad for profit. Now, I do have to note that these are early reports, that really we haven't had enough time to fully consider whether or not this is true. It is entirely unconfirmed at this point, but with the evidence that we do have, it seems quite likely that this is the case. Now, what Russia is basically being accused of is stealing grain from the parts of Ukraine that they have conquered, exporting it outside of Ukraine into Russia, down into the Caucasus, where it's then sent off to be sold to these North African nations to try and make a hefty bit of profit. Now, the Russian government, of course, claims that this isn't true. They're claiming that the sources claiming that Russia is exporting this grain in the first place are false. And then they're also claiming that this grain that is being exported isn't being sold either. So it's all a little bit unclear. Now, why do I think it's actually quite likely to be the case, though? Well, because the people who have been put in charge of these Ukrainian parts that are occupied by Russia, these people have been put into power by the Russian government themselves. They're the ones actually claiming that Russia is stealing this grain and exporting it. Now, that should be throwing up a bunch of flags because these people are in cahoots with Russia. They're practically Vichy Ukraine, and they ought to be against Ukraine on the opposite side of the spectrum, supporting Russia's invasion, but they don't seem to be very happy with what Russia is doing. To say that they are Ukrainian sources and so biased really wouldn't make much sense here. Belitsky, the man who is making these allegations, actually went on Russian state TV, of course with the permission of the Russian state, who probably didn't know what he was going to say, and he said that they're going there and they're making contracts and making agreements with Turkey. Now, personally, this does seem very familiar to the sort of foreign policy we've seen recently regarding Russia, where certain different parts of the government aren't really on the same page about the same thing. We saw this sort of thing when the Russian cruiser Moskva was sunk. At first, the Russian state said that it was a standard fire and it was their own incompetence that caused the ship to sink. But then pundits and military personnel and politicians went on TV and they went around the world telling everyone that Ukraine will suffer for daring to sink the Russian ship. It seems that something has been lost in translation here. Some people probably didn't realize that they're supposed to be hiding what they're doing with this grain, but it got out anyway. What is clear is that the inflation crisis is not over. Commodity prices are continuing to rise. Oil prices were sitting at $124 a barrel yesterday, and they aren't going to go much slower anytime soon. Wheat prices are high already and they seem likely to continue to rise. Other food commodity prices are likely to rise as well. The cost of living crisis that we're seeing in every country around the world isn't going to stop. And the impacts that this will have on the world economy and financial markets cannot be understated. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. It really does help. If you want to join our exclusive community, then check out our Patreon. You get access to our Discord server and extra content like access to my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. Also, make sure to check out the link in the description to Masterworks. It can help you protect your portfolio against market turmoil through fractional shares of art from world-famous artists. Art has historically proven to be uncorrelated to the markets, so it's a really valuable resource with the markets falling every week. There's also a link in the description to I Trust Capital, which helps you to invest in crypto through your tax-advantaged IRA, which could literally save you thousands. If you, like me, think crypto going down is a buy-in opportunity, then now is the perfect time to join I Trust Capital. Thank you all for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.